guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the case of a young man called Liam Gray. He was taken away cruelly from this world in 2019. When I was looking into it, I found it quite sad that there wasn't actually a lot of, I guess, publicity surrounding him and his case. There was a documentary done, don't get me wrong, you know, and I've seen like 1 or 2 videos on YouTube about it. There's a couple of articles, but really there's not a ton of information on it. And this case was suggested by one of you guys, so I appreciate that. Thank you. And of course, if you guys do have any more cases and that you want me to look into, please do let me know and I will look into them. Liam Gray was born. I couldn't actually find his birthday, which is kind of frustrating. I really did try. However, he was 18 when he was murdered, and so that would put him born in about 2001. I also could not find his father's name. Whether that he was in the picture or not, I do not know, but I found that his mother was called Joanne, and he lived in Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. He also had 2 siblings too. An older sister called Paige and a younger sister called Madison. Now, Liam's life was, I don't know, he's a very happy guy. Let's just say that, you know, he absolutely loved to sing, dance, everything. He got on really well with his siblings. His older sister, Paige, actually said that she felt like they were so close. The mother had them young and they were quite close in age, that she kind of felt like his second mum. And then he used to get on, obviously, him and his younger sister, they used to fight and stuff, but as they sort of grew up and grew a bit older, they got really close together. And Liam was like just such a fun, loving, happy guy. Like, he would just get out a mop and start mopping away in the kitchen and then just start singing and dancing. And there's a lot of videos of him just doing things like that, just wacky things. He didn't care. He had so much confidence, so much love to give this world, and he would just get up and spontaneously combust. Not combust, I didn't mean that at all. Spontaneously bust out some moves, and then, you know, he loved music. He loved all of that. He had a bit of trouble at some point in his life, like in school and things. I'm not entirely sure the full details of that. He then went to live with his grandfather, who lived in Nottinghamshire, in Mansfield. It wasn't that far away from where his mother and sisters lived. But he used to call him Pops, and it was kind of like, I don't know, when he moved there, things got a lot easier. Like, his Pops understood him, and it just worked really well together, him living there. And obviously, he was still really close to all his family, but he just had some issues in his life, and then they were sort of slowly getting ironed out. He was happily getting back to himself. He also had one of the bestest friends. He lived across the street from Pops, actually, and he was called Reese. Now, they were 2 peas in a pod. They was always seen together. They were like the best of friends. His family even described them as like being like a couple, because, you know, you wouldn't see one without the other. They were just together all the time. And they had such a fantastic relationship. And obviously, once he moved into Pops, he could probably see him a lot more because he just lived across the road. They were described as literally like brothers. And then, so they had a really close relationship. There was just the 2 of them. And then Liam sort of brought in another person, another guy who was like a year younger than them, or a few months. When this incident occurred, Reese and Liam were actually 18 and he was 17. So, you know, it might only be a couple of months between them. I'm not entirely sure of the exact dates. However, he was called Jonathan Treadgold. And let's just say his background was a little bit different from the 2 boys whose friendship he was joining. He had a criminal history. He'd been in trouble with the law at the age of 14. He'd seen domestic abuse and like substance use before, and he'd actually been put into care for a stint, and then moved. He lived on the same street as like Liam's mum, and then sort of when he was taken with her, she didn't see him for a while. But then the next time she saw him was when kind of Liam was bringing her around. But Liam really wanted to take John under his arms, under his wings, I guess. He felt like he had gone through a rough patch and come out the other end, and that he could really help Jonathan to do the same thing. So he wanted to help him. He wanted to bring him into the fold, be his friend, be there for him, you know, help him with whatever issues that he had. And so that's what they did. And Reese, when Reese met him, Reese thought he was really, you know, a decent guy. He really liked him. And then they all started hanging out together and they all really got on. So it went from like a duo to a trio. He'd always been really close with his friends, with his family. And then when he got to the age of 17, he found out some news that Liam was actually going to be a dad. And that really excited him. And it really made him grow up as well. Like, he knew that he was going to be raising a child in the future. He wanted to be there for that child. And so it just really grew up within like a short period of time. He decided that he was going to go and move to Birmingham, ready for when his child, you know, and everyone was sad to see him go, no one more so than Jonathan, because he was really gutted and didn't take it very well when he found out the news that Liam was going to be moving. And his mum and his family didn't want him to go, but they did, because he was starting a new chapter in his life. And obviously that's what happens. You raise your children and then they go off and they start their own lives, maybe their own families together. And so that's what happens normally. And she figured, well, it's only like an hour and a half away, you know, it's not that far. Obviously, she was sad to see him go, but she was happy for him as well. And Liam was super excited about it. So he made all these arrangements and he was basically going to move. But what he was going to do before he left was have one last send-off with his best mates before he did so. He was due to leave the next day. So now we're on the 1st of August in 2019. And by all accounts, Liam didn't want to get too drunk, you know. He wanted to enjoy himself, don't get me wrong, but he didn't want to get too wasted or whatever to the point where he might be ill in the morning or he might get up late and then it would just affect the next day when he had to get everything sorted. He didn't want to rush around. So they made a plan on what they were going to do, and it was going to be him, Reese, and Jonathan. They all met up at Pops' house, which was a hub for, you know, a lot of people. A lot of people would often meet there and go in. And they were just having so much fun. They went down to the local shop and bought some beers. They went back to Pops, I believe, you know, was in the garden, just taking snapshots, videos of each other. Just really having a good night, making the most of what would be sort of one of the, not the very last night out. Obviously, you'd probably make future plans to come back and stuff, but they wouldn't be able to do it as often. So, you know, it was just like this really enjoyable send-off that they were all having fun at. And then they decided that they might actually go down to the pub. Now, at this time, Liam and Reese were only just sort of 18, and Jonathan was still 17, and he had come on this night out in tracky bottoms. You know, it was what he found comfy and whatnot, and there's not normally an issue with that, but because he was 17 and they were going to go to the pub, they wanted to make sure that he would get served. And so Liam said to him, like, you know, do you want to smarten up a little bit or something, put some jeans on, because then hopefully you will definitely get served, because they would have got served, they were old enough, but obviously he was underage. So he's like, yep. So Liam lends him some jeans, he puts them on, and they begin walking down to the pub, well, in the direction of the pub. CCTV catches them, they're having fun, they're laughing, they're joking, and then they end up walking through this park. Now, this park didn't actually have CCTV, so that sort of section of it wasn't actually caught, but things quickly shifted because a text message was received and it was shown to everyone, and it was basically from Jonathan's sister's boyfriend. That's who it was from. And then I don't know what this text said, but it kind of riled people up, and Liam was like, oh, I'll sort him out, I'll like deck him or whatever, you know, basically sticking up for Jonathan's sister. You know, he wasn't doing it against his sister, he was doing it for her and saying like, I'll sort him out, I'll beat him up, whatever. And then Jonathan just took it all the wrong way. He was really fuming and basically said, no, you won't touch him, he's only a kid. And it caused like grief between the two. It caused an argument to sort of form, and then Jonathan would not let it drop. So they're still walking through the park and he's still going on and on about it. And Liam, who just wanted this to be a good night, a final send-off before he left to start his family and become a dad and all of that, you know, he wanted it to be a good night. So basically he told Jonathan that he thinks that he should go. If he was going to be like that, he should leave. And that he could drop off the jeans at Pop's on the way back. So he does. Jonathan walks off. He's caught back on CCTV again, walking off. And then he heads back to Pop's. Now, Liam, obviously, Jonathan was her friend. And, okay, sometimes things get out of hand, people argue, and, you know, they didn't really want that to happen. So Liam was like, oh, should we go and get him? You know, I wanted it to be a good night. I want us to have fun. I don't want bad blood. So Reese agrees, you know, and they decide that they're actually going to go back and get him to, well, sort it out, essentially. Maybe he'll then go for the drink run, whatever. So they start walking back, and they're not far behind him. Jonathan gets to Pop's and he goes inside. Pop's is in the living room. And then 4 minutes later, both the boys turn up outside. Reese stays outside because he's thinking, well, he'll go in, he'll sort it out, and then he'll bring him out or whatever, and they'll go to the pub. So he hangs back, stays outside, lets Liam sort of do his thing. Liam goes in. And then this is when, like, all hell broke loose. Devastatingly. So what actually happened is that the next thing Reese knows is that Jonathan has come legging it out of the house, like a minute later, if that. You know, it didn't take him long to come out. And he says, I've stabbed him, I've killed him. And then Reese is like, what? He didn't believe it. He's thinking, what the hell is going on? So Jonathan legs it. He's off. And Reese goes inside, and when he goes inside, he sees Liam stood in the kitchen, holding a bunch of like tea towels to his chest, bleeding, and he says, call an ambulance. So Reese does, he calls an ambulance, he hands his mobile to Pops, because he was frightened, he was 18, he didn't have a clue what to do, so he hands it to Pops, and Pops makes the phone call to the police, to the ambulance. During this time, Liam has he's bleeding a lot. He's managed to go into like the living room and go over towards like the sofa, and then he falls over because it was a severe injury. He's lost a lot of blood at this point. And then Reese said that he saw like his eyes roll into the back of his head. Everyone's obviously absolutely devastated. Pops is on the phone to the authorities, to the medics. He's putting pressure on the wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. You know, they're doing everything they can. Reese then goes outside to the front to basically let the paramedics in and show them exactly where the house is. You know, it's quicker like that. So he goes out. The paramedics arrive, and then they begin working on Liam. Now, bearing in mind, his mother and sisters have no idea that this has happened at this point. You know, like I said, he lived with his pops, and who is obviously very busy trying to keep Liam alive and help him and get the help that he needs. So he's not going to be ringing her up at that moment in time. So I believe it was Madison started getting some messages on like social media asking as to why there was a load of police cars outside of Pops' house and what was going on. So she starts like panicking, she tells her mom, and then that's when somebody tells them that basically Jonathan had stabbed Liam. So her mum was absolutely devastated, hysterical, and then they obviously start trying to make their way down to Pops' house. Now straight away the police knew who did this because literally Pops said it on the phone. They're like, you know, who stabbed him? And he says Jonathan Treadgold. He's run away kind of thing. So at the point of the medics trying to get in and work on Liam, they're also sending police out to try and look for Jonathan. And he'd left the murder weapon there, which was like a kitchen knife. He just picked it up, and it was like a big kitchen knife. He just chucked it, so that was still in the kitchen. So he wasn't armed in that sense, but you know, obviously they needed to get him. And then they're looking for him. They're working on Liam. They end up sending everybody out of the house because they actually had to crack open Liam's chest and basically perform internal heart massage on him because he had stopped breathing, and they're trying to bring him back. Honestly, it is so devastating because he was literally just 18 years old. I believe they did manage to bring him back, and they get him in the ambulance. They were going to do an air ambulance at first, but then they realised that they couldn't work on him as well. So they scrapped that idea and thought, well, we need to carry on working on him whilst he's in the ambulance to the to the hospital. So they're doing that. They put him in the ambulance, and his mum is outside at this point. You know, she's trying to get in, she can't, they won't let her in. And a police officer takes her over to where Liam's being put into an ambulance, and she basically manages to tell him that she loves him. And she just prayed that he heard it at that point. So they blue light him and the family off to the hospital, where Liam is rushed into surgery for open heart surgery because the blade actually hit his heart. Devastatingly, it did. In the meantime, as they're working on Liam, you know, they're trying to find Jonathan, and this call comes in from a sandwich shop owner who basically says that this kid, in a frenzy, leaped over his fence, and he goes outside to find out what on earth's going on. And he starts telling him about how he's been involved in some criminal activity, and tries giving his story about how he was attacked first and all this lot. Now he acted in defense. So he's like, what on earth's going on? So he rings the police because he thinks that's suspicious and there's obviously something gone on. And then they tie it back to what had happened to Liam. But then he legged it again. You know, he didn't stay there very long. He jumps over the fence again and off he goes. But they catch him on CCTV running down this road. And literally within 30 minutes of him stabbing Liam, he was in custody. Somebody else called in to say that they knew where he was. He was at a friend's house. The police actually figured that he was probably trying to make it home to his mum's house, because she lived in that area, you know, and that's where he was planning on going, kind of thing. As soon as the police arrest him, which is all caught on body cam feed, he starts breaking down and crying and saying that Liam attacked him first. So he was claiming that he did this in self-defense, which you'll find out whether that was the truth or not as we go through this. So going back to Liam, he was in emergency surgery. He was in there for an hour and a half. They tried everything they could, but sadly he passed away on the operating table. And obviously then they had to go and tell his devastated family that he didn't make it, and they knew straight away. You know, it's one of them things where you see it on the doctor's face, you know it's not going to be good news. Obviously they were absolutely devastated, heartbroken. Just, I can't even imagine. I wouldn't like to even imagine. I can imagine, but it's something you don't like to imagine because they just lost a huge piece of themselves that day. And it's just so sad. It just really is. So yeah, sadly Liam passed away. But, you know, luckily they knew it was. He was in custody, but he's trying to claim self-defense, you know, saying that it was accidental. Not, well, I guess accidental. Like, he said that basically Liam had the knife and he, like, grabbed it off him and he was sort of swinging it in, like, a slashing motion, and then he stabbed him. But Liam had the knife first, and then he also claimed that when they had an argument at the park, Jonathan ran away from Liam because he was frightened of him. Now, I've already told you guys that on the CCTV footage, which they did find later on, and witness this, he was walking away from that park. He wasn't running away out of fear for his life. He was walking. So that was a lie straight away. And, you know, it's just really hard because they had to try and build a case against Jonathan, but they also had to prove that this wasn't self-defense. So they looked into everything. Jonathan had these scars on his chest that he was showing them, saying that Liam was a bully, that he had hurt him before, that's what these scars were. Was claiming all of this. It was garbage. I'm just going to lay it out right now. Liam was not like that. He was such a lovely guy, and all he wanted to do was help Jonathan. But Jonathan was from a very troubled background, and a very much a person that would go very angry when he was drunk, and he was very drunk at this point. Like, even hours after this had happened, they tested his blood alcohol level and it was still 3 times the drink drive limit, so he was very drunk. And it was actually said, like in the documentary and things, that it's thought that that is when he would get very angry. Like, if he was angry, he felt like he couldn't really vent it unless he was drunk, and so he just flew off the handle, and that was that. But obviously they had to try and prove that it wasn't self-defense. So they're looking in CCTV, all of this stuff that he's saying that he's running away is lies. He isn't. They had to check every aspect of everything to their means to try and find out whether there was ever any remote proof that Liam had ever done anything violent or bullying or anything towards Jonathan. And guess what? They found absolutely nothing. You know, there was no evidence of that whatsoever. When they went to trial, he claimed not guilty and the verge of self-defense. In the view of self-defense, words are hard sometimes for me. Which really added insult to injury for his family, because not only had he destroyed their lives, you know, he had taken away a very big part of their life, a very loved person in their life, and stolen a father from his child and his new life and just all of that. Not only did he do that, he was then claiming that he did it in self-defense, which meant that his defense team was pushing for another autopsy to be done. And I have just remembered that I forgot something. In the initial autopsy, they were actually able to prove that Liam was not stabbed in a slashing motion like Jonathan was trying to say. He was stabbed with a jab motion, like one jab motion. So obviously that was lies too. So then they had to do another autopsy, which again his family weren't impressed about. They just wanted him to admit his guilt. He had already done the worst thing ever, but then he's trying to, I don't know, claim that he did it in self-defense of Liam, who was this monster, as he was trying to claim, who actually wasn't. And it just poured more salt into the wound. I mean, he didn't get away with it, thank goodness. He was actually found guilty of the murder of Liam Gray in his trial of February of 2020. He wasn't actually tried as an adult, which meant that he would get like a minimum of 16 years, which just... Well, that makes me angry, because he stole Liam's life away, and what, he could be out by like his late 30s and then live a full rest of his life. Liam did not get afforded that chance. It just makes me really mad. But there you go, you know, I am not the law and I am not a judge or jury, and it's just my opinion. And of course my heart just completely breaks for the family, for everyone, for Reese, his best mate, who was devastated at the loss of him, for his family, his mum, sisters, pops, just everyone around him. Even his baby, like she never even got to meet his father, who was so looking forward to starting a new life with him. It's honestly so heartbreaking. 18 years old. He was murdered at 18 by one of his best friends at that. My heart goes out to the family, it really does. But yeah, that's the end of the case. If you guys have enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for similar content. Anyway, that's all I have today on the case of Liam Gray. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.